welcome to our young adult panel discussion for Children's Mental Health Awareness Day. We're so happy to have you. Thank you for joining us. Today, we're going to be joined by our partners on this panel, Voices for Virginia's Children and 2 young adult advocates. Our theme for this year's Children's Mental Health Awareness Day is Beyond the Classroom Door. This theme speaks to the realities that children, youth, and young adults encounter in their lives outside of school environments, which can impact their mental health, thereby their academic success, and ultimately influence overall life outcomes. Concerns about students' mental health soared during the COVID-19 pandemic, with experts declaring a national state of emergency in children's mental health. And recent surveys conducted by the Virginia Department of Education show that half of middle schoolers and nearly 2/3 of high schoolers reported feeling nervous or anxious or on edge in 2022 alone. 1 in 5 children in Virginia have a diagnosed mental health condition. And even more troubling, 10% of middle school students and 13% of high school students reported that they seriously considered attempting suicide. Discussing and advocating for more mental health services in Virginia is necessary and life-saving. While these statistics are startling, we know that there are many individuals in the community already doing amazing work and that we can help highlight and shine their stories so that others can learn from them. So some of these individuals you will be hearing from shortly on our panel today. We felt it was very important to highlight the voices of young adults who have lived experience. And so we've invited 2 individuals to speak to the challenges and successes around their own mental health, as well as their role as advocates and champions in their community. They'll share about the current landscape and challenges facing young people today, recent trends in community violence, family relationships, and what parents and caregivers can do to support their children, the impacts of policies, and how we can create timely responses to this mental health crisis. Hearing directly from these individuals will help us as caregivers, policymakers, practitioners, and clinicians to shape the way we view our work and respond. Our partner on this panel is Voices for Virginia's Children. Just to share a little bit about them, they are the Commonwealth's only independent multi-issue child policy and advocacy organization. Their work is particularly focused on children whose needs are often overlooked, concentrating efforts on policies in the areas of early childhood, foster care and adoption, health and mental health, and family economic security. Voices for Virginia's Children recommends sound policy solutions, provides objective input to policymakers, and educates and mobilizes leaders and concerned citizens to support policy initiatives. So we have Kristin Lennox, who's the Advocacy and Engagement Manager for Voices for Virginia's Children. She's going to be our moderator today. She's responsible for identifying advocacy opportunities, developing traditional, digital, and grassroots engagement and advocacy strategies, and mobilizing advocates to support policy priorities. Kristin's most recent experiences are as a direct practitioner with children, youth, and families while serving as a program supervisor at Child Savers. She has over 5 years of experience providing community-based mental health services, predominantly responding to crisis or traumatic events. Kristin also manages efforts in community engagement and outreach through public speaking and interview opportunities. She's delivered global workshops and trainings on themes around trauma-informed care, healing-centered engagement, and de-escalation. Kristin is passionate about increasing parity in community resources and mental health access for youth and families in Virginia. She believes in a responsible, person-centered approach to community engagement. She earned her bachelor's and master's degree from Virginia Commonwealth University in social work, and she's a practicing licensed clinical social worker, as well as an adjunct instructor at VCU's School of Social Work. So thank you so much for joining us today, and we hope that you enjoy this critical conversation with our youth advocates. And I'm now going to turn it over to our moderator, Kristin, who will introduce our panel. Thank you.
All right. Hi, thank you, Nina, for the introduction. And hello, I am Kristin Lennox. I am the Advocacy and Engagement Manager here for Voices for Virginia's Children. And in my role here, I manage the Virginia's Youth in Action, which is a great, wonderful cohort of young change makers. And here they get to learn lots of skills to engage with legislators and decision makers to advance their communities through advocacy, storytelling, and community engagement. Today, joining us on this panel are 2 members of our cohort, so 2 of 12, Aaliyana Carr. She is from Richmond, Virginia. Aaliyana is passionate about advocating for change within the mental health care systems, especially as it relates to supporting young people, especially girls of color. She's the founder for SAGE, which stands for Support, Advocate, Grow, and Empower Girls of Color, helping connecting those young girls and femmes to mental health resources in their communities and their schools. And Aaliyana believes in solutions-focused approaches to expanding access and increasing diversity amongst mental health professionals, especially those that work with young people. Thanks for being here, Ali. And Asher Maxey is from Roanoke, Virginia. He is currently a freshman at Virginia Tech. He's a student who has benefited from mental healthcare access, gender affirming care, and Asher understands the importance of prioritizing youth mental health for diverse communities that have historically been marginalized. Asher works to provide education and increase awareness for the creation of ongoing mental health supports and resources for all young folks. Thanks for being here, Asher. All right. So we are here today to chat about mental health, about things that move us, and things that we want to advocate with others and educate others about. So we've got a few questions. This next first question is for both of y'all. How do you view the current landscape of youth mental health? And in your opinion, what are the biggest challenges that are facing young people today, and preventing them from those positive mental health outcomes? And I'm gonna bat it over to Asher first.
Got you. So as far as, I guess, the current landscape of youth mental health, I feel like one of the biggest issues I feel like there is for addressing it is that it's such a encompassing topic. It's so very broad that I think people end up get stuck on certain aspects of it, like maybe how social media will affect the youth, or how the environment, or climate change, or politics, all of these different factors, and they don't consider how they all go together and affect mental health of youth. So I think keeping in mind that it's usually not like a one thing will solve all. I suppose it's important to recognize that students not only have anxiety from maybe the environment they're in, but also because of the things they're learning about from the access they have to information from the news, or the environment they have at their home, or different factors like that. So I think it's just kind of keeping in mind that it goes beyond just a simple a one way or a one word phrase or something of that sort.
Yeah, thanks, Asher.
I can go next. I know that at the moment, we as a nation in America, we're suffering from a mental health crisis where everyone is suffering, not just, young people, also adults, but focusing on young people. I think one of the biggest issues is that mental health can appear in numerous ways, and people aren't always sure on how mental health appears in different people, because ADHD might look different for someone who's a girl compared to someone who's a boy. Depression might look different for someone who comes from a low socioeconomic household to someone who has access to, therapy and receiving the resources that they need. So defining what mental health can be like in different people, I think that's one of the biggest obstacles that we're facing right now, is because we don't know when someone's suffering, especially due to how people cope with different issues. And I think that one of the biggest obstacles that we're really facing at the moment is that not everyone has equal access to all the resources that they need, especially in a school setting, because I'm still in high school. So we have school counselors on campus, but sometimes those school counselors aren't always available. And when you're suffering from a mental health crisis, you need someone who you can talk to, and you need someone who can give you advice, but that's not always available. And sometimes their help might not always be useful. Sometimes you need more than a school counselor. Sometimes you might need to go to a therapist, like a licensed therapist, who can help you sort through your issues one-on-one on a weekly or bi-weekly basis. So I think there are a lot of aspects that we need to consider when looking at the mental health crisis, but overall, the biggest obstacle that's standing in our way is the, lack of resources for everyone, not just, people who come from higher socioeconomic communities, but also those who come from lower socioeconomic communities. They deserve the same resources as those in higher socioeconomic communities.
Yeah. Yes. Thanks for that. I hear you talking a lot about like resources, and like even seeing that schools could be a point of access for mental health for young people from the high school level to the college level, right, Asher? And being able to access it that way. So thanks for that, Aaliyana. And Asher, I really heard you talking about like outside influences that impact your mental health. And so I heard you talk like about like social media, also like just being so aware of the news and the news just being generally stressful, and maybe like to your point, Aaliyana, some people are still developing their coping skills, right, around taking in so much of that information and how much stress it brings you. I think I know we've talked in the past about like the impact of the pandemic on young folks. Do y'all have anything you want to add to those points, just outside influences or the pandemic? Yeah, no problem. Okay. In light of the recent news, so kind of continuing down that path that you first mentioned, Asher, especially a lot with community violence, which has unfortunately become really commonplace for us. How has this impacted mental health for yourselves or your communities of other young folks?
Start off again. Gotcha. So I think being in that position before and being a student having to go back to school following hearing about a tragedy like that, it's discouraging to say the least. It's disheartening. It feels like there's a cycle that happens. A tragedy will occur like that, and then it'll get an incredible, like an unbelievable amount of news coverage, and it's like the only thing that you can see. And it feels like, I guess you kind of feel guilty if you don't, read about it, you don't learn about it, but then you feel like you can't afford to have an emotional response to what you're reading, because you're still a student, you're still, you still have to take care of your family, you still have to work a job or whatever it may be. And then, that dies down, they talk about action, and then it just doesn't seem to materialize. So I think it's discouraging to hear about. I think it's frustrating, especially for a lot of students like in high school that, can't vote yet, and they feel like they're not being listened to, even when they, stage walkouts or, try to like spread the awareness as much as possible. So I think representation has a lot for, impacting mental health. And I think that this could be like one of those areas like Aaliyana was talking about, but, providing more resources in schools could be beneficial. Like I know that my old school kind of had guidance counselors meant to fill positions of like therapists, but, those jobs are kind of need to be separated, especially when you have so many students you're working with. So I think it would be great for students, after a tragedy like that, to have someone they can talk to, in a place they feel safe. But yeah.
Yeah, I appreciate that, Asher. Thanks.
Yeah, and I just want to relay like what Asher said, because at my school, we just suffered from like a tragedy where 2 students died in like a car crash, not like at my school, but at a neighboring school where a lot of people were friends with those students. And, it does help to have like school counselors, but at the same time, like when you have like a great mass of people who are suffering and trying to cope with their emotions and their feelings, you need someone who can not only balance all of those people, but know how to approach all of those people from different points of view. And I definitely think that it can be extremely stressful when you're trying to cope with the death of a student or another school shooting, and you have to go to school the next day and you're still expected to perform your work and like do all of your work and go to class and operate as if nothing happened. Mm-hmm. And I think that it should be normalized to take a time, like to take a step back and just appreciate that we can take this time to grieve. We can take this time to take a step back so that way we can protect our mental stability. And I think that's because of grind and hustle culture that's been normalized in America as a whole. We've normalized, not acknowledging our feelings. And that's played a tremendous role when it comes to us not properly taking care of ourselves from a mental standpoint. And it leads to burnout. It can lead to depression if it goes untreated. So I think it is really important to have those school counselors and therapists on campus so that way they can help students cope. And we really do need to normalize taking a step back, especially because I go to a private school that prioritizes academic excellence. And it's hard to perform well academically if you're suffering from a mental standpoint.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. It's hard to learn if you and be present if you are just living in fear. And I think kind of to the same point of outside influences being a stressor, you hear this news so often, kind of to your point, Asher, you are both desensitized and you feel a lot of great guilt and remorse for being I can't believe I'm just going on with my day after there's more of this news. And thanks so much for uplifting that too, Aaliyana, and I'm sorry to hear about your community's loss. All right, this next question is for you, Aaliyana. How do family relationships impact youth mental health? And how can parents and caregivers be a source of support for young people?
So for most children, their parents are people who they not only look to us to provide support for them, but they also look up to them. So whatever actions they are mirroring, they're going to mirror them back because, they're their children. And if a child sees a parent using unhealthy coping mechanisms, they're going to relay those same mechanisms. And if there's no communication in a household, let's say there's a child at home, and whenever something troublesome happens, there's nothing communicated, they're going to repeat that same action of not communicating when they're feeling stressed or when they're feeling worried. And whenever they're going through a mental health crisis, they're going to feel as though they can't reach out to their parents because they won't be supported. So because of those stressors at home, it can manifest in a way where students will repress their feelings, students will repress their emotions, and they will often just push their mental health to the side because they don't know how to cope with it. So I think one thing that parents can do to help with this is to start conversations and promote having open conversations with your children about how they're feeling, supporting mental health, because I know there's a stigma, specifically within the Black community, that mental health isn't real and that you shouldn't speak up about mental health. And for the longest time, I thought that there was something wrong with me because of the things that I was suffering from, until last year when I finally got the help that I needed. And I learned that it's okay for me to go through certain things and feel the way that I'm feeling. And it's not bad for me to be feeling this way. So I think promoting and just creating an environment where you can promote mental wellness and mental just support in general, that's a step in the right direction. And then if it's feasible and if you can, taking your child to go see a therapist, even if it's just to, talk to them. Because it doesn't always have to be you're going on medications. Because when people think of therapy, they think of you're going on medications and you're going to do this, that. But it's not always like that. Sometimes you just sit and talk to your therapist about how your day was or how your week was, and you work with your therapist on how to improve your life from that point based on the issues that you face throughout your week. So also just destigmatizing the fact that if you go to therapy, you need to be on medication. That's also a whole different ball ground. But just, I think what parents can do is just supporting their children, because I know when you become a parent, it's this whole new world that you don't really know how to work through, but just creating an environment where your children can feel supported, that's the biggest thing.
Yes, I'm here for all of that. Thank you for those. And I remember you talked before about that sort of that hustle culture of just get up and grind and kind of move through it. Are there ways that you personally combat or confront hustle culture that have worked for you?
I'm still working on that because I'm still struggling with pushing myself until I'm past my limit. But setting boundaries for yourself, even if it's something small, like when you're doing homework and it's 9:00 at night, just saying, I'm going to take a break, or I'm going to stop doing homework because I need to protect my mental and physical well-being before anything else. I think that when it comes to hustle culture, we don't acknowledge that we still have to take care of ourselves in order to quote unquote hustle. So just prioritizing our physical well-being is the most important part to me personally.
Yeah, I love that. Thank you. All right, Asher, I've got a question for you. How can policies negatively and positively impact youth mental health? And how can policymakers be intentional about validating youth lived experience and expertise?
Yeah, so I'm smiling because I love this question for me because I'm a, you know, as my bio suggested, I'm a trans man. I've had the ability to have amazing access to gender affirming care and mental health services. I mean, even when I was in elementary school, you know, I had a counselor that I was talking to, which feels unbelievable, especially comparing to some of my peers' experiences. But you know, recently there's been a lot of anti-trans bills that have been proposed. Fortunately, most of them have been, or I think all of them in Virginia were not supported, so that was good. But I think it's kind of like it feels like a smack in the face to put it in simple terms. It's definitely, it feels like a lack of support. It's definitely the type of policies that I think create a lot of anxiety for students in similar positions. And you know, while it's you know, framed in a way that they're doing it to protect, you know, kids, it feels like it's more detrimental than it is beneficial. And you know, I know that I kind of, thinking over that, put myself back in a place thinking of when I was in high school and when conversations about trans people would come up and how, you know, anxious I'd get, you know, listening to everyone's opinion and, you know, feeling like you're kind of in the middle of a debate, which is, you know, not really a place you want to be in, especially when you're just trying to get an education, you know, and take care of yourself. So I think, you know, policies like that, I think are extremely detrimental, no matter, you know, what they say the intentions of them are, especially when it feels like it's attacking a group of people. As far as positive policies, I know Elijah Lee is someone that we've talked about among ourselves before, but I know that he's been advocating for a bill, or I guess a Constitution amendment, maybe for Virginia, for lowering the voting age.
Yeah, that didn't make it out this session, but it started some really good conversations around it, right? But some trauma informed. He also was able to get the bill for trauma informed training for teachers. Also, that did get passed.
I think legislation like that, you know, is extremely exciting. You know, and even though like he wasn't able to get the other one passed, you know, I think that inspires students maybe a little bit to be like, okay, I can be a part of this. You know,
Yeah.
Elijah himself, like he's younger than me, you know, and I'm like, this guy's incredible. I think just having that representation, like I mentioned before, is really uplifting. And I think that helps mental health because you feel like, you know, they're listening or there's a way to get them to listen, you know.
Yes. So shout out to Elijah. I'll make sure that he knows we're singing his praises over here. And hearing you talk to you about like, about having seats at the table and being able to speak truth to power and do your advocacy. Can you think of ways that adults can be more ready to listen? I mean, you're an adult, but policy making, decision making adult.
I think that one's definitely, I would love to think of more ideas for it because I think I'm a bit, you know, unaware of what an everyday basis would be like, you know, for somebody like that, and the best ways to, you know, have exposure to different lifestyles, different cultures, et cetera, that don't usually have exposure to. But I think, you know, as far as
I
like
mean, that's one, right? Just being exposed more, like being in the community more. Yeah.
Absolutely. I think, you know, like involving those people, you know, inviting people to have conversations, even if they're tough conversations, just being willing to, you know, listen to one another and not just for the image that it gives you, but to actually, you know, work together to help people. And so I think, yeah, like, you know, reaching out to people, inviting conversations.
Yeah. Relating with folks to have more transformative relationships. Yeah, I love that. Thank you. All right, I have a question for both of you again. Some more about changes and improving those resources. So how do we create more solutions, create solutions-oriented changes to improve resources for youth mental health. I know you've talked some, Aaliyana, about things that can be better in schools. But either of you have more that you'd add about like how resources can help improve outcomes for young people?
I can go unless you want to talk first.
No, go for it, Ali.
All right. So I think one big thing that people need to consider is that you need to look at the bigger picture, because when people consider mental health, they consider, okay, we need more school counselors, we need more therapists in schools. But mental health isn't limited strictly to schools. You deal with your mental health on a day-to-day basis, an hour, minute-by-minute basis. So we also need to consider having resources outside of schools that students can have access to. Like if someone's going through a mental health crisis, they'll often dial 911 rather than finding someone who can actually give them help, because they don't know where to find those resources. And when they call 911, they're going to go to the emergency room and waste time over there rather than getting the help that they actually need. So if we have a direct hotline or something of that nature where students can call if they're having a mental health crisis, and go seek help through that hotline, or having a physical like building that they can go to, I think just providing more external resources like outside of school, that would be extremely beneficial, because I know a lot of people, they often suffer from mental health crises when they're outside of school, when they're at home, or when they're outside with their friends, or just outside of a school environment. So that's something that we need to consider. And also from a school perspective, we need to have not just one school counselor, but numerous school counselors, like a diverse range, you know, trans school counselors, people of color, just LGBTQ counselors in general, and everyone across the board. So that way someone can have someone to relate to their experiences and someone who can understand like what they're going through. Because when I was going through my mental health crisis and I was talking to my straight white therapist, she didn't really understand my perspective. She could support me, but she couldn't understand me as a Black woman going to a predominantly white school. But once I saw my therapist, who I'm still seeing at the moment, who's also a Black woman, she understood my experiences and understood what it was like to experience microaggressions, to experience racist comments and having them go overlooked. So having that representation, like as Asher had been mentioning throughout this entire panel, it's vital to really improving mental health resources.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks. And I hear you talking about hotlines, and there are some, but maybe there's space for more exposure to those, because if people don't know about 988 or they don't know about the crisis text line, then that means that those resources are being underutilized. We have to get young people in front of them and get young people to understand what they could do for them. Yeah. Thanks, Aaliyana. Asher.
I think she covered a lot of like I back all of that. Ditto. Like, I think another thing that I thought of about this is supporting teachers as well. I feel like is very important in this way. I think from what I've heard, like even since I graduated last year and came here to Tech, you know, I've noticed a lot of resources here that my old school didn't have, which have been amazing. And I feel like I've been able to see a difference. But even since I've been here, a lot of support has been taken away from teachers that were at my old high school. And I get to hear about how terrible it is there from the people that I still know that are there. And I think that that's definitely one of those things that, you know, directly affects students. You know, if you're in an environment that, you know, doesn't feel like comfortable, doesn't feel safe, then it's going to be hard to take care of yourself. And like Aaliyana said, like respect your boundaries and things of the sort. And so I think providing more resources in schools would be great. You know, maybe providing transportation if you have resources outside of school, you know, for those students that maybe don't have that, or, you know, just helping teachers too, make sure that they're not overloaded with all their responsibilities.
Yeah, that is such a great point, Asher. And yeah, I see you nodding on. Yeah, do you want to add anything, please?
Yeah, I can directly relate to that, because prior to me getting my help, like for my mental health issues, I went to my teachers of color who could support me, and they're often overburdened because they're not just teaching, but they're also on like our DEI advisory and helping students and helping administrators, like helping them to form a more inclusive and diverse space. And that shouldn't be their responsibility. They got hired to teach.
Right.
They didn't get hired to be a school counselor.
Right.
And with like the transportation aspect as well, these mental health resources need to be more accessible, because not everyone can afford to pay for like a therapist for like $80 every session. Like, going to therapy is expensive, and it shouldn't cost money for you to take care of your mental health, because it's just as important as your physical health.
Yeah, I definitely hear just from you both that like funding these things would be helpful, right? Funding transportation, funding resources for teachers, right? If our teachers are wounded, they can't show up the same way that you might need them to for a class that's also experiencing a lot of stress.
Just to add on that to it, like I think a lot of times that's where a lot of backlash for these things will come from, needing the funding for it. But I think if people start to realize too, like I think studies have proven that, investing in these things will also invest in the broader community. More educated populations or healthier populations, which, requires less money to, take care of medical needs and things like that. And we can, that helps everyone, not just the people that are currently in schools, but those that have already, in retirement and whatever.
Yes. Yeah. Thank you. Thanks for adding that. I'm also thinking too, when you both talk about access, thinking about like what's available in rural areas versus urban ones, right? I mean, the onset of telehealth has been really helpful, but you got to have internet or reliable data or reliable something to be able to access that. I wonder if either of you have different things to add to that. I know, Aaliyana, you're in Central Virginia, more of like a metro area. Asher, you're in Southwest Virginia. You're in tech now, so I know it's probably different for you now, but just wondering if either of you have remarks about just some differences there and what could be better.
You can go first.
Okay. So I used to live in Franklin County, and my therapist was in Roanoke. And so that was like a 45-minute commute for each session. And that's just, I guess, one way, maybe 30 minutes, 45 minutes. By the end of it, you spent hours of your day, with, getting help, but also, not being able to tend to, other responsibilities you may have. So I think, also having more, I think it goes back to kind of having resources in schools would probably be the most viable options for rural areas, because it kind of creates a central location to access these resources. But I also see how it could be beneficial to have those things separate as well. So like if it were possible to have transportation, or if it were possible to help students bring that access to them, bring it closer to them, like you mentioned, Kristin, about access to the internet too. Like
Right.
I think there's been efforts to work on that. I know like schools will provide that, libraries will provide that, but being able to have a private space to do that too is like another it's on top of that. So I think I guess it's just thinking of all like the ways that you can reasonably like provide those things for students, and in a way that that is beneficial for everyone.
Yeah,
I know for me, my experience is kind of like polar opposite, because I've been seeing my therapist virtually for like the past year or so. So I've never had to go through the experience of, spending money on gas and going to my therapist, driving 30 minutes and then driving 30 minutes back. So that definitely isn't convenient at all. And especially if you are already struggling financially, I know that can be especially tough, because you're already having to worry about putting food on the table, paying for bills, and then on top of that, you're paying for therapy and also paying even more for gas. And especially in this economy, gas is expensive. So I know it can be particularly difficult. So having transportation for those who might want to see a therapist in person, or just providing, the services to hold it virtually, because I know for me, I'm comfortable with going to my therapist virtually, but I'd also be comfortable going to see her physically. I mean, I can't do that anymore because she's all the way in like Alabama, but it's still beneficial to have those resources like offered to you and having access to those resources. So it's just piggybacking on what we've been saying, like, having access to anything that we need, like that's the most important part.
Yeah. And as we talk about access, I mean, it makes me realize that the more that you just make things available and put it in front of people's faces, like that is part of the reduction of stigma, right? Like, oh, it's here, it's present. Like I'm not seeking it out. It's in front of me. It's normalized that I should be tapping into this. It's not only normalized, it's acceptable. Like it's okay that I need this help. I've realized that access is more than just being able to physically or emotionally get there. It's also like setting an example. It's spinning the narrative that this is a good thing and we should be pursuing it.
I'd say that's one thing I've noticed since being at TAC too. Like they have cook counseling here, which is, provide services, and they have like stickers they'll hand out, and people will be proud to talk about, like
I love stickers.
Yeah, exactly. Like it does feel like it's taking away that stigma.
Yeah, I love that. Thanks for adding that. Yeah. Okay. To wrap us up with some remarks from both of y'all, if you had one wish for youth mental health throughout the Commonwealth, what would it be?
Got one?
Okay. If I had one wish for youth mental health throughout the Commonwealth, it would be to have more, I guess, physical access to the mental health resources that we need, and to have those resources be more affordable, because it is fairly pricey to even seek out a therapist, let alone, take medication and seek a therapist. Mm-hmm. So having more accessibility would definitely be amazing. And having more, in an ideal world, if we had a bunch of social workers and a bunch of therapists of all different shades and ethnicities and different, sexual identities, having all of those people represented in our schools, and not just high schools, but also like college, because that's a transition point, and a lot of college students, they need that support because they're going through a huge transition. They were with their parents for like 18 years and now they're transitioning to being on their own. So that's
like, yep. Yeah. Thank you. Thanks, Aaliyana.
I feel like a broken record with mine, but I think representation is just, that's one of those things that over the years I've realized how valuable it really is, especially before I was out as trans, and then transitioning and being like, okay, where who am I looking up to? Like, where are my peers at? I think, being able to have a voice in the changes that are happening, especially, being, a part of the next generation and inheriting the world that's in front of you. I think that's, students want to feel like they're able to make a change. Young people in general want to feel like, they can help themselves if they need it, or they can help the people around them, and they can live in a world where, they're excited to go about their day, or, so I think, representation, having those abilities to reach out to people and have access to care that you need.
Yeah. Thank you both. So definitely hearing accessibility being like a big wish, and representation, and both of those things make you feel like you belong. They make you feel like you have value, and that people are investing in you as a person, and people that also look like you or have similar experiences like you. And that sense of belonging it does a lot of really good things for the heart, and we really need that, right? All right, I would love to hear just any closing remarks, things that you want to leave with folks to remember, to think about, to connect folks to. We'll start with you, Asher.
I guess the first thing that honestly came to my mind was radical rest, and taking care of yourself, setting boundaries, like Aaliyana mentioned. I think being able to have conversations like this feels so, beneficial. It feels so empowering, but, reminding yourself that you don't have to solve it all in a night or a day or whatever, like it's okay. You can take your time and you're not alone. So, you know, I appreciate, you know, having you all to have this conversation with and being able to make things like this happen.
I appreciate you so much, Asher. Thank you. Aaliyana, how you want to close this out?
Also, just emphasizing radical rest and normalizing actually taking care of yourselves rather than flaunting your fake taking care of yourself on social media, because we know that's a thing, but actually taking care of yourself mentally, emotionally, physically, spiritually, all of that, all of the above, and putting an emphasis on the fact that our youth are the future. And, you know, if we're going to have a good future, we need to have our youth in great hands. And at the moment, we are really in great hands, to be honest. So just putting an emphasis on the fact that if you take care of us, we'll take care of y'all. So,
Ooh, love that. I
But
love that. Thank you. Yeah, take care of them so y'all can take care of us. You're going to be our future bosses and our future leaders, and we need you. No, I thank you so much. Thank you both for being part of this panel, for sharing so vulnerably. I definitely, I appreciate so much that I get to look to you all as younger mentors. And I love learning from you both. So thank you for your remarks here and for your continued advocacy as part of Virginia's Youth in Action, and just all of the advocacy and great work I know you'll do beyond. Your presence has so much purpose, and I'm so grateful. So thanks so much. Thanks everyone for tuning in. And hopefully some of these remarks will inspire you to go out and pursue some of the change that these young folks need. Thank you.